Hi. In the second lesson on medical applications, we'll switch to the more futuristic side of medical innovations using data science. The issues that we talked about last time, such as massive health databases and the uses of artificial intelligence and machine learning in many aspects of healthcare, are realities today. They lead to significant ethical issues, including those based around privacy and the role of humans versus technology in delivering our healthcare. In contrast, the issues that we'll talk about in this lesson, genetic editing and interventions in our brain, are at a different level in two crucial respects. First, the world is just barely getting started in doing them, and it'll be years, decades, and in some cases, we don't even know whether and when these things will become reality. Secondly, the potential ethical implications of these technologies may be the most profound ones possible. What it means to be human and the ethics of changing that. Sounds like fun, eh? So for the first part of this lesson, we'll be talking about the CRISPR gene editing approach. Some simple scientific background about CRISPR, and then two articles. One about the key potential uses of CRISPR, and then the second one, a really interesting article about ethical considerations about where this type of approach should be used and importantly should not be used. The second part will be about neurological interventions, which are big words for saying changes to the function of your brain. And in particular, we'll be talking about the Neuralink project led by Elon Musk. The first article gives more of the perspective from the project and from Musk, and the second one gives some perspectives from others. These are great topics for ethical debates, and so at the end of this lesson, we'll have a discussion board where you'll be asked to give some opinions and then comment on the opinions of your fellow students. Before that, the virtual backgrounds. Some of you may have guessed, or most of you may have guessed that the last one was in India. It was taken in the historic city of Calcutta, which is in the northeast part of India in the state of West Bengal. It's a picture of a Jain temple. I don't know if you're familiar with the Jain religion. It's an ancient Indian religion, rather small now. It has about 4 to 5 million followers, mainly in India. And as you can see, Jain temples can be very ornate, beautiful structures. You can see more examples of that if you look online. For today's virtual background, since we're discussing the most profound ethical issue that we will in this course, I decided to situate us inside a religious building. It's one that's moderately well known. I've used this sometimes as a background in Zoom meetings, and some people have guessed where it is. So let's see if any of you can do that, and I'll discuss it again in the next lesson. We'll start with a discussion of gene editing, in particular CRISPR. First, I'm going to give a little scientific background, drawing from the article from Live Science that is an optional reading for this lesson. There's a disclaimer, as with a number of topics, a personal disclaimer that I'm nowhere near an expert on this. I've just tried to learn about it and will convey as best I can what I've learned. I think it's worth quoting from the opening paragraph of that Live Science article. So I'll quote, "CRISPR technology is a simple yet powerful tool for editing genomes. It allows researchers to easily alter DNA sequences and modify gene function. Its potential applications include correcting genetic defects, treating and preventing the spread of diseases, and improving crops. However, its promise also raises ethical concerns." You know there's ethical issues when they mention it in the first paragraph of the article, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to read it to you. In common usage, CRISPR, which is the letters CRISPR, but is pronounced like I'm saying it, CRISPR, really is shorthand for what's appearing now on the screen, CRISPR-Cas9. Technically, CRISPRs are specialized stretches of DNA, and the letters in CRISPR actually stand for words that denote that, the words clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats. The CAS9 part comes from the protein CAS9, which is an enzyme that is fascinating. It acts like a pair of molecular scissors that are capable of cutting strands of DNA. And then somehow in common usage, as I said, the whole thing, the strand plus the scissors protein, get referred to as CRISPR. It's really amazing how this works. The CRISPR technology is adapted from the natural defense mechanisms of bacteria and other microorganisms. These organisms use CRISPR-derived RNA and various CAS proteins. There's others, but they include CAS9, to foil attacks by viruses and other foreign bodies. And they do so primarily by actually chopping up and destroying the DNA of a foreign invader. It almost seems like a cartoon version of science. Chop, chop, chop goes the DNA, but that's what it is. And then it turns out that when these components are transferred into other more complex organisms, it allows for the manipulation of genes or gene editing. This is all recent stuff. In fact, until 2017, no one really knew what this process looked like. A paper published in late 2017 in the journal Nature Communications by a team of researchers led by 2 Japanese scientists showed what it looks like for the first time when CRISPR is in action. We'll now turn to the Time magazine article about CRISPR being tested in humans. This article gives us some insight into the uses of CRISPR. It doesn't mention much about ethical issues, which we'll discuss in the next article, although it does mention the biggest ethical controversy of all that has resulted connected to CRISPR so far. The article explains that CRISPR has the potential to cure diseases that are caused by genetic mutations by snipping the mutations out of a person's DNA using those molecular scissors that we just talked about. The sorts of diseases this applies to include certain sorts of cancer, sickle cell anemia, and some kinds of blindness. And then it immediately mentions the biggest controversy that has arisen with respect to CRISPR so far. This one got a lot of publicity, and you may have heard about it. In late 2018, a Chinese doctor edited the DNA in 2 twin embryos so that the embryos and the resultant person would be immune to HIV. The controversy was twofold. The biggest part is that when you edit in the embryo, this affects not only the DNA of the resultant human being, but all of their descendants. The second controversy is this is very new stuff, and so the impacts of the editing are still uncertain in any case. We're not going to try to evaluate the ethics of that here, but if you think about it a little bit, what ethical theory would you apply to a change that not only impacts that human being, but all of their descendants? It's a fascinating territory that clearly was not anticipated by any of our predecessors. The article then mentions some of the current trials that are going on with CRISPR. This includes editing genes of living people. By the way, in that case, there are not hereditary implications. And in trying to treat both eye disease and blood disease. This is currently being done sometimes by editing outside of the body and introducing those new cells back in, and sometimes directly within the body. As the article clarifies, the initial candidates are what are considered single gene diseases, where you can snip out a certain section and then resume the normal or intended function. There's still plenty of risks and unknowns in doing this. It's very new stuff. They include that occasionally the CRISPR can actually cut the wrong thing. The aim of the scissors apparently is not yet perfect. We certainly don't know what the long-term impacts are because there have been no long-term cases yet. And we also don't know whether there are going to be side effects. In the case of the eye treatment, the way this is done, by the way, is to inject into the eye under the retina, and the CRISPR mechanics are encased in a deactivated virus cell that then goes to work. Another candidate for CRISPR, as I mentioned briefly, are blood disorders like sickle cell anemia and one that's called beta thalassemia. Both of these are really serious things. They can have very serious consequences and they can lead to death. The approach to them is sophisticated. It's to make a genetic change to a hemoglobin producing mechanism in the body. So even though this will snip away some DNA, may sound like a fairly simple to understand approach, there is serious biology and medicine that's going on here as well. Aside from the embryo controversy, the article doesn't discuss the ethical issues. Of course, there's always ethical considerations in trying any experimental medical procedure. And generally, we look at that in a utilitarian way. We assess the potential risks versus the potential benefits. In this case, there's another ethical consideration, which is it okay, or when is it okay, to genetically modify another human being? The next article that we'll talk about now gives a much broader perspective on that question. We'll now turn to the article, "Please Don't Edit Me Out," from the Washington Post. I found this a fascinating article. It asks the question, which human conditions are ones that can be fixed or should be fixed versus ones that are differences to be appreciated, and who decides? This is a question that could lead to very deep philosophical discussions. The author starts on a personal note by discussing the gene that causes a form of dwarfism, which she says has affected her own family for 3 generations. It sounds like that means her parents, herself, and her children. So with genetic editing, we might be able to fix it. And the question is, should we? She clearly sees dwarfism as a feature to be praised and appreciated, as opposed to a condition to be fixed. While it's a little trite, there's an old saying in computing in general, when something goes wrong, that it's a feature, not a bug. And that's what she's talking about. She considers this to be a feature, not a bug. And by the way, it should be noted that this is a person who's already had a very successful life, including serving in an important position in the administration of President Barack Obama. She then goes on to mention other sorts of disabilities that she looks at the same way, including deafness and Asperger's. Clearly, there's many people who have these conditions who not only have made great contributions to society, but their contributions may be in part because they have those conditions. There's 2 quotes from the article that seemed really important to me. The first quote, "Many of us see our disabilities as a rich and diverse culture. Many of us want to pass that culture down to our children through our genes, and many of us see no reason not to. We should have that right." And then the second quote is, "Where is the line between what society perceives to be a horrible genetic mutation and someone's culture?" There are lots of deep ethical issues here. I'm just going to make a few comments. First, previously we've talked about some things that seemed really important. They are really important, such as facial recognition leading to incorrect arrests that can have a lasting influence on somebody's life. That's serious. But this is about playing God. This is about changing the characteristics of a person and potentially even their descendants. So it's, in some sense, at an even different level. There's also some key practical questions that this article doesn't really address, and that is, where do you draw the line between things that we might all agree should be fixed, potentially those blood diseases we were talking about just a few minutes ago, and things that are more a matter of choice, like dwarfism? And the final question that I had is, should the people have a choice? That is, there may be somebody who is in the same condition of having the genetic dwarfism who would prefer to have it changed so that it is not passed on to their children. Do they have that right as well? For the context of this course, I think the main thing that you should be thinking about is, as a data scientist, what are your responsibilities? Clearly, on the one hand, these ethical issues I've been framing are not data science issues. They're far more profound than that. On the other hand, we'd never be having these discussions if it weren't for the data science that enabled the sequencing of the human genome and then genetic editing in the first place. So I'm just going to leave that one hanging for the moment, and in the discussion group at the end of the class, you'll get to voice your opinions on what you think your responsibilities should be.